Are you ready to take your business to the next level? Every day there are countless books and articles that are published offering the key on how to make your business a success. It's easy to feel overwhelmed trying to keep up and run your business. That's why Deb Creer created the Business Power Hour. Keep up on the latest trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. Let the Business Power Hour do the heavy work for you.
Good morning, good morning. I am Deb Creer, and I am passionate about giving professionals the tools that they need to make themselves and their businesses as successful as possible. And today we're going to be talking about just a very cool subject with a wonderful person. He's got a very diverse background, and we're going to learn a little bit more about that. But please join me in welcoming Dr. Gino Collura to our program today. Welcome, Dr. G. How are you doing today?
Deb, I'm wonderful. That smile of yours makes it a great day on my end, Deb. So I'm just privileged.
I know, just the Mutual Admiration Society going on here. I love it. I love it. Well, let me tell people a little bit about you, and then we will jump into this.
Wonderful.
So Dr. Gino Collura is a seasoned behavioral scientist, published author, speaker, and president of Ultraviolet Living, a concierge health and wellness firm dedicated to providing skilled care for affluent families across the country. A native of Tampa, Florida, Dr. G has spent the past 12 years as an entrepreneur, executive coach, and featured on various media platforms such as NASDAQ News, WFLA, as well as WTSP. He has been a go-to for various C-suite executives seeking to enhance the depth and impact of their interactions with employees as well as clients they serve. And what he didn't put in his bio is he also has a background as an educator. And I think that very much ties into everything that he does. So again, Dr. G, welcome.
Thank you so much, Deb. I'm so thrilled about this conversation. I've really been looking forward to it. You're such a powerhouse of knowledge and expertise. So to be able to have this exchange is going to be an absolutely great time.
And, we already know that we're going to continue chatting afterwards. So this is going to be so much fun. But one of the things I always like to know from my guests is how they got to where they are today. And as I mentioned, you've got a pretty varied background, but it all comes down to helping people. But tell us about how you got to where you are today.
It's a great question, Deb. And when I take a look at the halls of history, particularly my history and what led up to this point, it's amazing how things happen in life and they're interconnected in ways that you can never imagine, right? But there's that constant variable of wanting to help others, wanting to pour into others and see them achieve and attain things they never thought was possible. So as mentioned, I was born and raised in Tampa, Florida, always had a very, very intense passion for wanting to help others exceed and excel and various platforms, right? So if you take a look at some of my earlier things, what I did in my younger years, I was actually involved in the anti-kidnapping industry.
I saw that and yes. In emergency preparedness, things like that.
Yes, that's exactly right. So I had a wonderful opportunity to actually live abroad and work in that capacity. And I lived in South America, particularly Colombia, for about 3.5 years, doing that kind of work. But the really cool thing about that experience, Deb, is, as you mentioned, education is a pillar for me, right? I never thought in a million years I would go into being an entrepreneur or going into business in general. I always thought that, coaching, teaching, whether it's on the security executive tactical side or actually in an educational environment as an adjunct professor in a university setting, but still that element. So the lessons that I learned, Deb, from the executives that I protected truly is what gave me the education to understand how business works, right? And these are some big players, right? Some big folks that were coming down looking to expand their operations into the Latin American market. And of course, my job was not to speak business with them. My job was to make sure that the time they hit tarmac, time they left tarmac, they got home safely. So, I took those lessons and came back to the States in my early 20s, mid 20s, started my PhD program, started my first company. And had a wonderful run of 5 or 6 years of teaching folks across the Southeast United States how to be their own bodyguard, right? And so that kind of segued into taking me through my PhD and then leading me to start my writing my book, right? Which is the first book. I've got the second one already underway. And having had a family that is deeply entrenched in the medical industry, kind of what you and I were talking about earlier, we've got nurses, doctors, pharmacists, you name it. And my mom being a cancer survivor and having spent a lot of time taking care of her, I always knew that I felt compelled to do something and kind of shift gears as I was kind of waving goodbye to the security industry. I wanted to do something that was a bit more in alignment with that passion that I felt for wanting to be there for folks when they were going through some of their darkest moments. So I have a dear friend of mine who she and I were going back and forth, and a very successful businesswoman who I admire and respect so very much. And she had an exit from her first business, was getting ready to start a second business, and started really rocking and rolling and making things happen, had a wonderful team of people. And she goes, look, I've been there, done that as far as building a business and having a successful exit. I want to be a part of it, but I don't want to run it. Right. So would you be interested? And I said, well, let's sit down and have some coffee talk. Yeah. Let's kind of work that out. Right. So, it was a process. It took 6 months of just kind of feeling things out. She had a lot of wonderful questions for me. I had great questions for her. And, fast forward to where we are present day. Of course, I'm the president of the company and we are growing tremendously. I have an opportunity to work with folks from all over the United States, really providing this concierge health and wellness model that, you're seeing so much growth in this space. And a lot of it has to do, obviously, with COVID and people having that demand for wanting care at home. So, in the interim of all that, one thing I will say, and I left out kind of the timeline of how I got to where I am. So my PhD is in a discipline called neuroanthropology. So it's neuroscience mixed with medical and cultural anthropology. And I focus specifically on what goes on in the brain when it's dealing with very high levels of stress, trauma, PTSD, things of that nature. So I actually worked quite a bit with United States military special operations and had quite a few individuals that I worked with for about 6 years and studying in and out and kind of the different things that would work and help and things that wouldn't, right? But at the end of the day, whether it's combative stress and trauma or it's just trauma in general, trauma is trauma, right? As far as your neuroscience is concerned, it's the same thing.
Your brain goes, nuh-uh.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so that has been a huge segue as far as being able to talk to patients of ours and folks that we serve, things that they're going through that are really traumatic, life-altering, life-changing. And just, it shakes the ground that you're on. So being able to bring that skill set as well has been invaluable.
Right. And I love that you went into an established company, because a lot of people who I interview on the program founded their companies, and so it's totally different to go into a company that was already established. It's still fairly young in its life cycle. But yeah, you didn't have to worry about that. Now, how do we apply for a business license and all of those various things? And so I can imagine that really was a big benefit.
Deb, and it's such a good point that you raised. And I will tell you my vice president, who's my right hand, and she is just an absolute rock star. She's been there from inception, right? So there were so many things. I mean, truly, I stepped into that role and she is just a powerhouse, right, in of itself. So knowing that she was at the helm and kind of spearheading all those internal operations, the infrastructure, and being able to pull that together to really talk about the strategic vision and leadership of where we're going with the company. Yeah, it was different because having gone through that process from ground zero, starting my own company to exiting the company, there's a lot of stuff that happens, right? You get the wheels turning, a lot of things you got to throw up on the wall, see if it sticks. And there's a lot of resiliency that's required in those initial phases, right? And so stepping into an established company with a culture already rocking and rolling, with personnel already there, it definitely was a bit of a different flavor.
Right. And I was reading about the company. Again, it's called Ultraviolet Living. And so it's just ultravioletliving.com, very easy to find. And what I love is that you know exactly who your market is, exactly what you're giving, what the products and services are. Now, obviously, those change over time. And hello, COVID does change some things. But and technology, more than anything, changes healthcare in so many ways. But the problem that I see many business owners do is they want to serve everyone. And you can't do that. And yes, you're serving affluent people. I've had other guests on the program that deal with company, there are companies who lease jets, exclusive properties, and things like that. I mean, hello, it's America. And so, but I love the concept of concierge medicine. And now I'm sure you have never heard this, but I love the show Royal Pains. And I thought that was such a fun show. But concierge medicine is where the doctor comes to you, or the healthcare provider, might not, and obviously that is a different level of payment. You're paying for that service, whether it's a monthly subscription or pay as you go or any of those various things. But, to be able to have the doctor come to you, it actually harkens back to, many, many, many years ago.
Absolutely.
When the doctor got on their little horse and they came, toddling out to where you were. And the care that you got was so very different, as opposed to just, hey, we were talking about this before, I'm patient number 21. No, the concierge really allows that personalization.
Right. That's right. That's exactly right, Deb. One of the things that for us, and you kind of hit the nail on the head, we're not in the business of volume, right? We are not concerned with having a pipeline of patient after patient after patient. That completely defeats the purpose of our model. Our model truly is quality and depth, providing quality care at a very deep emotional and psychological level as well, because it matters when you're talking about folks who are confined to being at home and they can't walk, they can't bathe themselves, or they're recovering from a traumatic accident or injury, whatever the case is. Dignity is important, right? Mutual respect and understanding, very important. And you have to understand, this is someone's mom, dad, son, daughter, right? All these things that are we often forget in the clinical side of things, and we just kind of look at the case and we kind of just look at the patient and what are their stats and what's going on. That is not the business that we are in. We are very much, we go through an incredibly lengthy process, Deb, to establish the appropriate type of care by the appropriate caregiver, and to make sure it's not just about the client or the patient, it's also about our interaction with their loved ones and their tribe, right? Because that very much matters, and you have to establish that. And when you're in someone's home for 12 or 24 hours a day, making sure that there is that synergy is extremely important. So we go into a lot of questions and interviews and in-depth background on the family and the patient to make sure that there's really good alignment, because the last thing the patient needs to be worrying about is the quality of the person that's providing care for them. That shouldn't even be a question, right? They have a fight in front of them. That's where their focus needs to be.
Right. We won't turn this into a discussion about the healthcare and insurance and all of those various things in the States.
Oh, we could go for days on that one.
And obviously it needs improvement.
Yes.
Any place can be improved, but a part of what you do is can apply at every level. The things like, from a patient's perspective, making sure that it is a good fit for you with that caregiver, telling them, no, I'm not going to work with you any longer. People who have known me for quite a long time know that I was diagnosed with cancer, all sorts of things. And I fired more than one doctor. They were all very good. There was nothing wrong with them. It wasn't a good fit. And I mean, the same goes in business. If you are working with someone who is providing a service to your company, or if you are that provider and it's not a good fit,
that's right.
Jump ship, and obviously don't leave them stranded. I shouldn't have used that analogy, but, you want to, because if you're unhappy, they're unhappy. Doesn't matter which side of the equation you're on.
Right.
And so it is so important to make those determinations. Is this going to be a great long-term relationship?
Yes. There's something that I utilize quite a bit, and it's called the 50% rule.
Okay.
The 50% rule means that every single relationship that you're a part of, you're 50% of it. Right. And so if that 50% isn't plugged in, if it's not tuned in our line, it's not going to work. Right. Because you can only keep it back for so long and it's going to come out. It's going to come out. Right. So better to say, you know what, there's a misalignment here. Let's shift gears. Let's pivot. And it's amazing how many folks don't don't want to do that, right?
Right.
And so it's very important to do that for peace of mind, as well as being able to have your head in the game, so to speak, with whatever the process is going to be to get you back on the road to recovery, to thriving again, to living this thing called life, right?
Right. Yeah. And it is about making, I love that 50-50 analogy, because so many times we hire an expert. Whether it's a physician, whether it's, the marketing expert, whatever it is. And we make the decision that, first of all, they're the expert. So they know it all. We shouldn't question them. Or more importantly, I'm just going to give it over to them. And it needs to be that 50-50, that give and take, that yin and yang, all of those various things that are showing that it is a partnership.
Well, and the thing about that too, Deb, is when we think about partnerships and the folks that we have that are boots on the ground, right? My nurses and my therapists that are deployed out across the country, caretaking and providing care for someone is such a privilege, right? To be in a position to be able to help someone get back on their feet. But the support that's needed for those who are providing that care is such a paramount thing. And you see so many things from, and I know we're not going to get into it, but from an institutional setting perspective, you just don't see that kind of support. Right? And so whether it's my care providers or it's my patients and clients, I will have a touch point, myself or my vice president, every single week. They will be hearing from us. And it's a very important thing, because the 50-50 rule for us is it's not just the care provider, it's the entire team, right? It's everything that we stand for, we represent. And the most important thing in business, right? Follow through. Are you actually following through on whatever that commitment or expectation was? And that is a huge, huge principle for us. That is a guiding light.
Right. And as we said, that should be any business.
That's right.
And especially if you were a consultant, you should be, or, even if it's just you individually, what can you be doing? And I think one of the absolute most critical things is that communication.
Oh my goodness.
Telling them what you need and things like that. I was working with one of my clients recently, and, love them to pieces. And, they, what they do, I think is absolutely phenomenal. Otherwise I wouldn't be working with them. But they send me pictures, they text pictures to me that I then edit, and then I write the post and I post on social media for them. And bless their little hearts, they would text me at 2:00 in the morning, or at 4:00 in the morning. I mean, all these various times. And, and I have to have my phone on. I can't have it muted, and I have to have it next to my bed for, several reasons. But, so when it goes bing, 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 at 2:00 in the morning, it is rather annoying. But I thought about it and I thought, well, but I never told them. Right. So I communicated and I said, this is absolutely fabulous. Love this. However, because I can't mute my phone, because it's nice to give them the reason why, as opposed to just, I said, please don't text after 11 or before 8. Total compliance. Yeah. And because we had that, and I think I put in there, if something comes up and you need to reach me, please do. But nothing's coming up at 2 a.m. right? So I and I said, do you have any questions? Is there information that you need? Things like that. So it was, but I had to communicate that with them. They couldn't just psychically know it.
Right. And it's interesting about communication too. There's a rule that I use. It's a 3C rule, right? And the 3C rule says this. It says, okay, so we have this tool, this thing called communication. What's the purpose of communication? The purpose of communication is to commune. What's the point of communing? Well, in a very literal sense, it means to share, right? So we communicate to share, to do what? To build community. Right. So communication to commune to community. Now, so what are we saying? So you're building to get to a place or you're sharing to build, right? And build to share. So if you take a look at what it takes to establish and maintain trust and mutual expectations amongst folks, the important communication is everything, right? Because without trust, there is no community, and there's definitely not any sharing that's happening that has validity behind it. So your ability to have that skill set is such an important thing, and the comfort to actually use that skill set, because so many folks, they want to and they bite their tongue. They want to and bite their tongue, right? And time and a place for everything. But when it comes to that, those sorts of intimate relationships with folks from a care provider perspective or a personal perspective, it's incredibly important.
Right. And again, they're not psychic.
No,
It's
exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
and what and it obviously doesn't matter what it is, business, caregiving. I remember one time I was with my elderly father up in the Colorado mountains, way up in the Colorado mountains, where there was one doctor in the county. And the closest hospital was in a different state.
Oh, wow.
And so, I knew the doctor very well. He was 4 years older than me. We'd gone to school together, all these various things. Dad goes off to the doctor, and he was still able to do this by himself. So he goes down to see Mike. And there were two things that he had wrong, right? And that he was going for the appointment for. And one was, I don't remember what one was, but the other one was that he had a really bad sore throat. Mm-hmm. And, he came back and I said, well, what'd Mike say? And he said, oh, I should do such and such. And I said, well, what did he say about your sore throat? Well, we didn't talk about it. I said, what do you mean you didn't talk about it? He should have known I had a sore throat. So I pick up the phone. Mike, he's coming back. But yeah, I mean, we none of us are psychic. And I had a conversation just yesterday with somebody about how we need to remember what are the facts,
right? And
then what are we turning them into? So what are those stories that we're telling ourselves? And is that total fiction? Is that semi-fiction? And go back to what the facts are. And to say, okay, well, now this business told me they would do XYZ for me. Mm-hmm. Have they done XYZ? Yes. Did they not do ABC? Well, they didn't know they were supposed to do ABC, right? So it is about having that communication.
And it's such an important thing too, because when you take a look at what it takes to not just build and maintain those expectations and have the expectation management process, mm-hmm. but also at the end of the day, assumptions are a heck of a thing. Mm-hmm. And the brain and not to be a nerd for a second, right? But the brain, when it's wiring to figure out what's going on in your immediate environment, right? One thing that it does not like is ambiguity. It does not like not knowing. It doesn't like being confused.
Right. And so it makes stuff up.
Bingo. That's exactly right. So your prefrontal cortex is an incredibly wonderful thing, but it starts to do all this stuff with imagination. Mm-hmm. And it starts connecting dots that aren't necessarily there. And my goodness, when you have a personality type that can become fixated on those things, you can drive yourself nuts. When at the end of the day, you hit the nail on the head. Go back to the facts. Mm-hmm. What do you actually know? What are you assuming and what do you actually know? Right. And then kind of fill in the space in between. Mm-hmm. And it's such an important thing.
And ask those questions. Okay, well, you said you would do A. I would like you to do B. How do we get there? And things like that. But yeah, when you mention, not knowing and how we make things up, that's always, it's so important. I used to do media training and, so I train senior level folks or whoever might be interviewed by the media. Yeah. And of course, one of the biggest things especially if it's a somewhat controversial interview, the reporter is trained for silence. And so, you'll give your answer and then they won't say anything. And, and because what they're wanting you to do is to blather on with something that might not be good. And attorneys use that also, people who are, when they're wanting you to fill that pregnant silence.
Yes.
And we do typically, fill it with, something that is off topic, something that is made up. And so I would always tell people, just sit there quietly and smile, because they don't like the silence either. It makes for a horrible interview, right? Especially if it's, televised. So, we need to fill those gaps, because people do make things up and unfortunately they make them up in many cases in a negative way. Oh, we haven't heard anything from our CEO recently because the company's closing.
Right.
No, it could be that, even if it's that there hasn't been anything to be reporting, let people know. Haven't been talking to you just because things are going very well.
Right. Yes. No, but I mean, and it's such an important thing though, too, because the idea of having the need to fill the void. Mm-hmm. don't have to. Like if you just ask, right, or if it's proactively communicated, there's nothing to report. Everything's a-okay, right? That goes a long way. It absolutely goes a long way.
And of course, parents know to do this. And it's, you have a very young child. I have no children, but we all know this, right? Now, what did you do? Why did you come home after midnight? And then you leave, and then pretty soon they'll go,
leave it. Yep, I've been asked that question a time or two in my adolescence. I can tell you that.
Yeah, and your parents just waited.
Yes.
They didn't give you options.
Yeah.
They because they knew you were going to hang yourself.
That's exactly right. And without fail, I absolutely did.
Yeah. Instead of just smiling and saying, "Thank you, Mom," or whatever.
Exactly.
But all this comes back to good leadership skills. And one of the things that you deal with and want to work with people on is emotional intelligence. So talk to us more about that.
Yeah. So and it's a buzzword, right? You've heard EQ and emotional intelligence going around like crazy the past 10 years. And what it boils down to, right, truly is, let's start with the number one thing, and I talk about this actually quite a bit in my book, that the most important relationship you have in your life is the relationship that you have with yourself, right? And so your ability to truly understand who you are, right? And that's a loaded one of itself. I can't tell you how many times, and from a consulting perspective or a coaching perspective, I ask that question. And I ask, tell me who you are. And 9 times out of 10, I'll get, well, I'm John Smith. No. That's a name given to you by your parents. Tell me who you are, right? It's a whole different ballgame, right? You start playing in a different sandbox. So, when we start thinking about emotional intelligence, understanding my whys and my hows and where do they come from? And then the really important part is questioning it. Right? Why am I feeling like that? Because I don't necessarily need to feel that way. Instead of the hallmark, well, that's just how I was made. That's just
that's how I was taught. That was, that's what society says.
Yes, that's exactly right. And the idea that it's fixed, you can't change that. Well, there's this thing called neuroplasticity that says that you can change that, right? You just have to make harder choices. And they're harder choices because it's not what you typically and normally do. But you have to first get to a place where you can stop and recognize, before I respond to this particular stimulus, right? There's that gap in between stimulus and response. When that gap hits, what are you doing with it, right? Are you falling back into your default neural circuitry and just blurping out, or are you stopping and saying, my gut reaction is this? Is that the most conducive and productive thing to do right now to get to an end result that's actually going to be positive? And that is where emotional intelligence really comes into play. There's a clinical psychologist that I'm very dear friends with, Dr. Bill Anton. And he is a well-renowned executive coach, works with Fortune 500, 400 CEOs all the time. And he has a concept called self-knowledge, right? And self-knowledge is different, right, than emotional intelligence. And self-knowledge is transformational, right? It can transform your life, but you start getting into the root of it, right? Knowledge of yourself. Okay, so what does it really mean to change? And why is it so difficult for me to change? Because a lot of people say, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, right? And that's been debunked several times over. It just takes immense discipline, and it takes an immense amount of understanding of yourself, of what kind of life do you really want to live? What kind of leader do you want to be? How do you want people who are witnesses to your existence and can speak to you when you're no longer walking this earth? What's that ripple effect? What's that impression? But we don't spend enough time asking these sorts of questions because we're so fixated on a very fast operational tempo, right? Which from socioculturally has been kind of indoctrinated in us. I mean, listen, you live in Atlanta, right? I mean, I'm in Tampa. It's fast, right? It's not New York, LA fast, but it's still fast, right? So
it's Southern fast.
It's Southern fast. I like that. I love that. So it's a really important thing. And when you think about it in a sense of from a leadership context, what is leadership, right? It's your ability truly to influence others to get to some sort of common objective. And so when you start talking about influence, how in the heck, Deb, can I influence somebody else if I can't even influence myself to change my behavior pattern, right? And so that's where it starts.
Well, and we have so many companies and it doesn't matter what it is, where, you say, well, why are you doing X?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's the way we've always done it.
Done it. Oh my gosh.
And, whether it's, I'm questioning somebody at a drive-through. Well, why did you serve it this way? Because it's the way we've always done, or it's company policy, right? Oh, it's company policy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things that COVID did was just turn that completely upside down, because we couldn't do many of the things the way we've always done.
Right.
But what it did was totally screwed up these poor leaders. I still say, any manager, because managers are different than leaders. Leaders are very different. It might not be the CEO, might not be, but the managers who were micromanagers, who no longer had their employees literally under their thumbs, I'm sure most of their little heads just went, but COVID really did make many companies rethink how they did things, whether it was how they worked with their employees, how they worked with their clients, how they provided products and services. I mean, because they had to.
Of course. No. And that's the thing, right? When you start talking about shifting and pivoting leadership and management, this is a really important thing that has come up so much throughout my own career, right? But the importance of adaptability, right? If you are not adaptable, which means that you are guiding yourself and your company and leading others based off of principle, right? Because there's a breakdown between principle, strategies, tactics, and attributes. And when you start looking at what are the guiding principles are always malleable. You can apply them in a myriad of settings, right? Well, strategies are a little more specific to get to some sort of objective. You use certain tactics for those strategies, and those tactics have attributes that define them. But the principle side of it, it's so easy to talk to so many folks who are in a leadership role and ask, okay, so tell me, this is your end result. What's the strategy to get there? And they'll fire it off. They'll fire it off.
Oh yeah, we do.
Exactly. All right. Then you ask them, okay, so what's the 40,000 foot view of the principle that you're utilizing to get there? And it's like
crickets.
What? Right? So it's great from a doing perspective, but from a meaning making perspective of what defines your organization and how it operates, that's a whole different ballgame.
Right. And one of the other things that COVID really showed leaders and managers and business owners and all of those people was the importance of empathy. I mean, it was one of those things where, and I still love the fact that we were told 2 weeks, everything was shut down for 2 weeks, everything's hunky dory. And we all went, yeah, right.
Yeah.
I mean, just common sense told us it was going to be longer than 2 weeks. But, but what it meant was for 2 weeks, companies kind of went, well, and then they kind of went, oh, crud. And so many times, especially I think, in bigger businesses, well, and small businesses also, the leader, the business owner really doesn't get to know people from a personal perspective. It's not good. That's not bad. I mean, it's just, but when all of a sudden they're having to deal with the employee who has their, 2.5 children at home, their spouse at home, they're having to work from the kitchen table with spouse, kid, dogs, going, and all of these various things, the leader, the boss had to all of a sudden have empathy. And I think that was a very tough go for many people.
So first off, you're right. I agree with you 100%. The second side of that is it's amazing that how much we have turned away historically, not now because you're seeing the need for it now, but historically, how much of a shift there has been away from empathy when in reality, as human beings, our brains were built for it, right? We have these things called mirror neurons. Well, mirror neurons are also known as empath neurons, right? So being able to see the reaction, the facial expression, the tonation, the energy that someone's giving and try and match them, right? So we're on the same playing field so we can speak and communicate because from a community perspective, that's how you build your tribe, right? You start connecting these dots and building these bridges together. So to see the cut and shift that happened probably post 40s, 50s, and then fast forward to right now where it's, oh no, you better bring a healthy dose of empathy because life's different now.
Mhm.
Business is different now. Things are
Mhm.
still getting done, but the nature in which they are getting done has shifted and changed.
Mhm.
And quite frankly, I'll tell you, man, I don't think for me it's not a bad thing. I'm really happy to see the sorts of conversations that are happening in the
Right.
workplace,
Mhm.
breaking barriers from a personal perspective. I will tell you, for us at Ultraviolet Living, it is so important. We do this thing called a fireside chat once a quarter, and it's
Mhm.
company wide. I want everyone on, and it is a pouring. Let it all out. Like
Mhm.
let's just throw it out there, right?
Mhm.
It is such an important thing to
Mhm.
do because people need to feel they need to know that they're being
Mhm.
heard. They need to know that they're being
Mhm.
respected, and they need to know that you can relate and you can understand,
Right.
right? And that is, if you don't have that in your recipe book of
Mhm.
leadership nowadays, it's absolutely a
Right.
challenge.
Yeah. And one of the things too is I think we also needed to see that they were human also.
Yes.
And so it was okay to see that they were at their kitchen table. Now granted things have switched a bit.
Yes.
We have learned put the have your camera in a good place. We don't like looking up people's noses. We
Of
don't
course.
like all these various things. Backgrounds are obviously more important as
Yes.
we figured out, hey, we're going to have to do this. But
Right.
it is interesting to see the things that go on in people's lives. The cat that goes wandering
Mhm.
across, or the child. I interviewed someone earlier this month whose child woke up from her nap in the middle of our interview, and bless her little heart, she was not a happy camper.
Oh,
And she's small enough, I'm pretty sure it was, I need mommy and I want to eat.
yeah.
Well, mommy was busy, you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
but and she was very apologetic. I said, why? This is life.
It is.
But if we, 2.5 years ago, we would have thought, oh, how unprofessional, right? And now it's just like,
So
oh,
true.
I wanted to talk to the little child on camera. I thought that was, for me, that was fun. And so we have shifted, and maybe everybody's gotten a little bit better with emotional intelligence.
Yeah. You said such an important line, Deb. And it's very simple. This is life, right?
Hmm.
This is
Yeah.
life.
Hmm.
And this idea of having facades, oh, you can't do that, or the dog's barking in the background, or the child's crying. You get to really look at the end of the day, well, what's
Hmm.
the end result, right?
Right.
If this person, are they getting done what they need to get
Hmm.
done? Are they doing a
Yeah.
great job? And they're
Hmm.
just going through the motions
Hmm.
because, to your point, that's
Hmm.
their life.
Right.
And having a respect for that and an
Hmm.
understanding for that, it opens
Hmm.
doorways. Because look, at the end of the day, and you truly, post-industrial revolution is when a lot of that kicked off, right? And then we're
Hmm.
starting to shift back from an empathetic perspective. But when you look at the idea of, we are human beings, not human
Hmm.
machines. And
Right.
remember that being part, yep,
Hmm.
that goes a long way.
Right.
It goes a long way.
And it is all about caring for, especially those frontline people.
Yes.
And I think we really saw that during COVID, and we still see it
Mhm.
with, a lot of people who are doing multiple tasks, who are, the whole, I've talked to people who have said, we really don't know if our employees are coming in from one day to the next.
Right.
Okay, now that's, to me, that's unprofessional from that
Right.
person's perspective. But
Right.
at the same point, it really, it is very challenging, and some of it really can be taken care of just by showing that empathy, showing that caring.
That's right. Well, and I think where it gets to be a little bit of a slippery slope and a challenge, right?
Hmm.
And I think a lot of people are learning this right now. There is such a thing as being too empathetic, right? Which means that you're
Right.
being not having the structure, right,
Hmm.
that's needed to actually
Hmm.
achieve
Right.
goals, get
Hmm.
things done, right? And so it is, and it's a skill set.
Hmm.
Since it's a bit new for a lot of folks and
Hmm.
a lot of leaders, learning. Okay, so what's kind of the
Hmm.
midway point of?
Right.
No, I mean, I absolutely understand you've got
Hmm.
things going on, but at the same time, we have very real goals,
Hmm.
very real
Right.
investments, and
And
we
I
need to.
don't need to know every single detail about what's
That's
going on. Hmm.
exactly right. One of the things that I utilized in our company is this thing called GRIP, GRIP,
Hmm.
and it stands for goals, roles, interactions, and processes.
Ah,
Right. And so every Monday, 10 a.m., I want to hear GRIP from everybody across the
hmm.
leadership team.
Not gripe.
Yeah, exactly. Not right. Not right. Absolutely not. But they break it down. This is what's going on. All right, cool. Who do you need to interact with? What role are you going to have in that interaction? What's the process to get to the goal at the end of the week?
Hmm.
That's it. If you need me, you know where to find me. But I'm not going to be hounding you. I'm not going to have supervisors and managers hounding people. No, 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 no. Like, we're all adults and professionals. We all know how to balance. And if we don't, we have to learn, right? And so if that's the thing, then of course we provide that as well. But that is such an important thing as far as understanding the balance point, because if you get at the end of the week, right, and there's beats that are skipped, right, things that are not done, well, then it's a different conversation. Right. And so, but no, it absolutely, what you're saying from an empathetic perspective makes total sense.
Yeah. And there is, it's funny because we have companies that, they want everyone to be empowered, and okay, that's great, but you still do have to have somebody in charge.
Yes.
Who makes those good and bad decisions, who signs those checks, who does, signs those contracts, all of those various things. And, I've talked to people who, especially if they got promoted from within. And I had this happen to me. I was part of the team, and then I was promoted to manager. And all of a sudden I wasn't their buddy. And that was very hard because I'd been their buddy. But, and so, finding that fine line between knowing, okay, this person's child is sick. And so, they might need to go home early. They might need to work from home. Obviously this was, quite a while ago. All of those things, or knowing all those details that you really don't need or want to know as that boss. So having empathy, it really is. It's a fine line.
It is.
And it's, you still have to be kind of that cold, unfeeling person on occasion. And I think for many that comes easy. For many that comes very hard.
And I will tell you, and you're right. For me, in my own personal experience, the first business that I had, it was completely my fault, right? I had my first 7 hires. I treated them like the best of friends, right? I treated them like family, had them over for dinner.
You socialized with them.
Exactly.
Right.
And Deb, I had to fire all 7 of them, and it was not their fault. It was my fault. Right? Because of the expectation and the tone that I set. And that was a hard learning lesson for me, right? Because I want them to know that I care, right? But at the same time, when rubber hits the road, they also need to know from an accountability perspective, there are things that have to be answered for. And when that gets meddled and muddy, not good.
And heaven forbid that you're family.
Oh, no. Oh, we could go off for days about that one.
I know. Oh, yeah. I mean, I have the utmost respect for people who successfully have family businesses, and I do. I really wonder what the heck. I'm actually, this month, it's really funny. We have a father and a son who are going to be on the program separately, and I've talked to them before. They're wonderful people, and they are in business together, and they have rules. No business at the Thanksgiving dinner table.
So important.
And all of these various things, and then they said, it does get tough. Especially when there are those bad decisions, that, hey, you didn't meet this goal, or what do you mean you spent this much money, all of those things. And they have done it very successfully, but it is very difficult.
And it's few and far between. I will tell you, from what I have seen, more often than not, from the family business side of things go south, and it ruins relationships. Not all, to your point, not all the time. There are some that I have seen that are absolutely.
They have to work really hard at it, though.
You do, because to your point, those boundaries, right, of what's okay and what's not, depending on what environment and the time that it is, that matters in a really big way. Because if you're carrying something inside that happened during work hours, and that night you're having family dinner together, and you just want to, you can't ruin that level of dynamic that exists there, right? So. But it's a skill set. It's absolutely a skill set to navigate those waters, going back to emotional intelligence, right? Being able to recognize what's going on in that gap between stimulus and response, and how are you going to deal with it?
Right. Yeah. And the other thing that we have had to adapt to is having spouses together. My husband, for, our entire marriage, got up every morning at 5:30, went to the office.
Yeah.
Came home at 5-ish. I had that whole part of that day. I've been home based for many, many years, all to myself. And now he's here, and will be. I mean, he went in, cleaned out his desk, all of those various things. Yeah. And now we're very lucky. We have a really big house. But I think that's been one of the other challenges that people have is, what if, things are like this. And so it's important to, for that relationship. And see, I'm segueing to talk about your book,
Yeah.
to be able to tell that partner, that spouse, I need some time to myself.
That's
We
exactly
we
right.
have to have separate computers, whatever. And so because it is very and it's really funny, for I've been in situations where I was the work wife, right?
Yeah.
And so, it's and I'm saying that not in a bad way, but in a good way,
No, of course.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and but yeah, all of a sudden when, our personal relationships dramatically shifted because of COVID,
Hmm.
that was a big challenge. And so, here we go. Here's the book. Okay. 7 Layers of Successful Relationships is the book that
Yes.
you wrote. And unfortunately, I didn't have a chance to read it. So tell us about it.
Yes, absolutely. So, one of the things, it's just like peeling an onion, right? There's a lot of facets, a lot of exterior, a lot of internal layers that go into you, let alone everybody else, right? That you surround
Mm-hmm.
yourself with. So, when I started reading that book, reading, my
Mm-hmm.
goodness, writing that book,
Mm-hmm.
I've read it umpteen times. I can't tell you from an
Right.
editing perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But when I started writing that book, I was actually going through a bit of tumultuous times with relationships, right? That I had in my own
Mm-hmm.
universe, right? I mean, personal relationships, professional
Right.
relationships. I started asking a lot of questions, like
Mm-hmm.
why, what is happening? And so I literally, Deb, I had my office just turned into one massive whiteboard. And
Mm-hmm.
I just started whiteboarding
Mm-hmm.
everything that I knew from a human behavior perspective,
Mm-hmm.
clinical psychology, sociology, and then taking my specific variables and
Mm-hmm.
plugging them in. And then I really started thinking about folks I've had the opportunity to work with and coach in
Mm-hmm.
employee engagement and
Mm-hmm.
leadership and vision and whatnot. And there were some principles that emerged,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so the 7 layers truly are 7 principles,
Okay.
right? And so each chapter breaks down what should go into each principle and how to
Mm-hmm.
in a very real sense apply it. Now, here's the tough part of it. I wrote that book and I did not do an audible, and I did not do an audible on purpose because the focus that I want the reader to have with this book, it's a workbook. It's
Mm-hmm.
not just something for a quick read, right? You have
Right.
to really sit down. And
Mm-hmm.
when we talk about emotional intelligence and self-knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
you cannot have any distractions. You
Right.
really have to go into the
Mm-hmm.
depths of the well, right? That
Mm-hmm.
that feeds you. So it is designed to read year after year, once a year, right? And then to
Right.
track.
And review. Mm-hmm.
That's exactly right. To
Mm-hmm.
track the growth that you have with the relationship you have with yourself
Mm-hmm.
and how that relationship has played out with the 50-50 rule, right? Being 50% of every relationship that I have.
Mm-hmm.
If my 50% is getting better,
Mm-hmm.
it's getting better, then in
Right.
theory, those relationships are
Mm-hmm.
getting better. Or I've come to a realization that maybe that relationship doesn't fit
Right.
and maybe that relationship needs to exit stage
Mm-hmm.
left,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that really was the point of that book. And then, in a very real sense, and this was a tough part. And I will tell you, I'm an academic writer, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you're doing my PhD and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So just a fun fact for you, Deb. So I had to edit that book 8 different times
Right.
because the editor said,
I mean, we're not going to use the words dumb it down.
yeah,
But
exactly. He's like, you're killing me right now. Like this is, and I'm like, oh my gosh.
Mhm.
So even at that though, I've had the opportunity to utilize that book. I do a lot of training still with the military and relationship management there,
Mhm.
obviously the corporate environment as
Mhm.
well, and of course applying it to ultraviolet living and all the patients we get to serve.
Right.
So I've gotten great feedback on it from people across the country,
Mhm.
and it's been such a privilege though to have folks read it.
Right. And I can't wait to read it. I'm looking forward to that. And it's funny, we do keep talking about the 50-50 rule.
Yes.
And let's be honest. It's not always 50-50.
Oh,
Sometimes
it
it's
is not.
70-30. Sometimes it's 90-10.
80-20.
Sometimes it's
Yes.
99-1, right?
Yes. Yes.
But hopefully it averages to
That's right.
50-50.
That's exactly
And
right.
in a business environment, I think one of the things, and it was so funny, I was talking with someone yesterday, and he said his goal as a boss is to learn as much from his employees and his staff as they learn from him.
Mm.
And I think that's a great example of a 50-50. And so yeah, I mean, most of the time he is the boss. So maybe it's 80-20.
Sure.
But yeah, it's that average. And we see the toxic relationships when it doesn't come back to that balance.
Oh,
When
absolutely.
you have the manipulator, I had a boss who, oh my gosh, the man screamed. I mean, screamed. I mean, that was just his way of life.
Yeah.
And he swore and he did all sorts of things. And I was young. I was in my early 20s, but I was not a dummy.
Yeah.
And I went into him. I hadn't been there real long, and I was his office manager.
Yeah.
And I told him, I said, you get one. And he went, one what? And I said, you get to call me starts with B once. And I said, the second time you do it, I own your company. Now, I mean, this was 40 years ago.
Wow. Yeah.
And he used up his one. Now, it took him quite a while, but he did use up his one. And all I did was I held my finger up for one.
That's it.
He backed right down. I mean, he just,
Good for you.
We have those relationships, and it's as you were saying, there are times where it's like, no, this is, and you might not be able to get out of it right then. And I'm, one of the, especially say employment, you don't want to just quit, because you got bills to pay, all those things. So it might be that you start planning, okay, I'm going to leave. I'm going to get a side gig, and sometimes it is having those conversations, like, you get one, but it is about putting yourself back into where you are healthy. And that means getting rid of those toxic relationships.
Well, and I think that's an important point, Deb, is knowing what healthy looks like, because so many folks don't, right?
Right.
Because
they were brought up in unhealthy relationships and all of those various things.
Right. So, having the ability to really take a grasp of the agency that is your own ability to make choices and decisions, to cut things out that don't belong there, right? And how do you define if it belongs there? Well, is it making you a better person?
Right.
Is it making you a better version of you every single day? I don't care if it's a 0.5% better every day, whatever, right? Is it getting you to where you need to be to optimize yourself, right, as an individual? Because so many folks don't have that blueprint, right? They don't have the ability to look back and say, well, gosh, I gave myself the time to really do some deep exploration, and this is what's going to make me happy. Because if it's going to make you happy, it should coincide and run parallel to keeping you healthy, right? And if that's not there, then we got a challenge.
Yeah. And it is so much exactly what you were saying. Your most important relationship is with yourself.
Yes.
And there are obviously hard conversations that you're going to have with yourself, but I've talked a lot on the program with other guests about those little voices in our heads.
Oh, yeah.
Those little voices that tell us you can't do that. You're not smart enough to do that. All of those things. And those come from prior relationships. Maybe it was a parent,
exactly right.
Maybe it was a teacher. And in many cases, they were trying to protect you. Oh no, little girls don't do that. Or various things like that. And of course, having that good, positive relationship with yourself is listening to that little voice and then saying, bite me.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, but it's a very real thing, because you have to question what it is, right, that's going on up there, because your brain is
why is that going through?
Exactly. And it does. It takes discipline. It takes the ability to look at yourself in the mirror and say, what are you doing? Like, why are you thinking the way that you're thinking? Why would you even entertain anything like that? Whether it's figurative and imaginative, or if it's real, it doesn't matter, right? Having the ability to have the courage and and this is a big one too, right? So confidence. And I always break this down for folks. When you break down confidence, the etymology of it, right? It's in Latin, it's confide, right? With faith. Faith in what? Yourself, right? Well, what is faith? You can't necessarily put something tangible, right, when it comes to faith, but you just know that you have this belief that cannot be quantified, but it can be felt. And if it doesn't feel right, it does not belong, right? And so, and even if it's tough, it's still, if it's not there, if it doesn't feel like it should be there, it shouldn't be there. So all that to be said, it very much matters when you start talking about these little voices and these little things that come into our head that are massive distractions or lead us down a path that we do not need to be on, or questioning and second guessing ourselves. Never good.
Right. And I think it is important sometimes to listen to that little voice, because that little voice is telling you, don't touch wet paint, don't touch hot stove.
Oh, sure. Oh no, absolutely.
And things like that. But it's also, you should be learning from that. Okay, don't touch hot stove, pick up hot mitten thingy.
Right.
And when that voice says, don't let your boss treat you like that, or don't let your employees treat you like that, right? Because we have bosses and leaders whose employees take advantage too.
Absolutely.
And so it is those, when that little voice perks up,
Yeah.
we need to pay attention to it. But then there are times where then we're telling that little voice, go away, or we're acknowledging, oh, okay, little voice really is trying to protect me. What are we doing?
Right. Right. And that is such a key point though, right? I mean, the idea to understand, okay, so the little voice is there, but where does it belong? Right? Because if it is something that is productive for us, then absolutely. But to your point, and I'm so glad you raised that point though, of if you're a team member and you have a boss who's mistreating you, right? Your level of tolerance for that, right? I think you're seeing a trend where more and more folks, I know I have with folks that are being brought on board, where tolerance for those sorts of things is truly starting to get smaller and smaller, right? Because their voice is becoming more pronounced, which I think is a great thing, right? But on the same token, going back to the balance between the empathy and then really having that sense of accountability to your team members, leaders are trying to figure out, well, wait a minute,
right?
Team members have this newfound like what I'm going to put up with and what I'm not going to put up with. How do I navigate that and make sure turnover is not high,
right? And that we're still producing what we need to be producing? And
that's exactly right. And that is the delicate dance, right? Of being a leader, and then also having the ability to have a very deep wherewithal of yourself, so you can connect and also understand that when others are taking advantage and when others are doing what is they should be doing and giving the proper praise for it.
Right. Oh my gosh, we could go on forever on this. And all this means is that we just need to have you on again, because this is such an important topic.
I'm there.
I think it was funny. One of the last things that popped into my head was the Me Too movement. And how do you deal with that? I mean, like the gentleman travelers who said, all of a sudden I can't travel with my staff because, and I mean, just all sorts of things, so I think we definitely should continue this conversation, because it is so important. But until then, you need to tell us more about what it is that you do. And we will have a link in the show notes to your book. But, tell us more about the services that you provide, and more importantly, how people connect with you.
Absolutely. So at the end of the day, what it is that we bring to the table and is new, right, in the home health industry is truly having the ability to proactively get ahead of certain challenges that will prevent patients and clients from thriving, right? Our goal at the end of the day is thriving. Now, let me put a cautionary word out there. We do have clients and patients who are back onto the road to recovery, but we also have patients that we serve that are transitioning, right, into that hospice element, right, as well. So,
but you want to make it as good as it can be.
That's exactly right. And clients and families go through so much when they're having to navigate those hurdles. The last thing that they should have to worry about are folks who are qualified and respectable and really are in tune with those family dynamics to provide the highest and best quality of care. And so that is what we do. So the majority of it is skilled care nursing. So we have nurses deployed all over the country who are just incredible at what they do. So nurses, nurse practitioners, we do have elements of physical therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy. But truly at the end of the day, where our biggest calling is in the nursing realm. And so we work quite a bit with very affluent families here in the States, but also internationally. We do have folks they've got a vacation home down in Argentina and they're going to go to a vineyard down there, right? And one of our nurses will go with them. So we do that quite frequently as well. So the best way to learn more about us, and let me just tell you that if you haven't had a chance to look at how our company came to its inception.
I saw that. Oh my gosh. The reason it was founded was incredible.
Yeah. So the founder, Marcy, she's such a lighthouse for so many people, and just a wonderful example and an incredible businesswoman. So anyone who's tuning in, please go to www.ultravioletliving.com. Our story, our history, even if that's all you do, I just encourage you to go learn about our story, and more importantly, Marcy's story, and how she came up with the idea of providing the type of care that we provide for folks. Because it's truly, I don't want to say.
I know, no, we just a teaser.
Yeah, it's just a teaser. It's a mind-blowing story of trumping adversity and all these different challenges and being at the pinnacle and top of Mount Everest in life, and then things kind of shift and
crashed.
Change. So yes, in a very literal sense. So, but her story of resiliency and adaptability it's incredible. It's very inspiring. So, but yeah, the best way to definitely get a hold of us is that website link. And then Deb, I know you'll probably put up some emails or phone numbers or whatever to put up there as well.
Well, and you're big on LinkedIn. So
yes, very big on LinkedIn, of course. Yeah, we have a presence on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. Obviously, what we do there, it's not so much about outreach; it's just more fun facts. All of our clientele, typically, it's a word of mouth type business. Because to your point earlier, Deb, about knowing your market,
right?
Our market is very small.
Yeah, you're not advertising in in wherever.
No. It's very, very small, and we like it that way because again, it's not a question of volume for us; it's a question of quality, and quality assurance is really, really important with the kind of care that we provide for folks. Right. And we work with a spectrum. We have patients who are kids, we have middle age, we have young teens, we've got, of course, a good chunk of folks who are in their older years as well. So everywhere in between.
I love it. I love it. And again, that's ultravioletliving.com. So great information. So do you have any final thoughts that you want to leave everyone with?
I think one of the biggest things is, first and foremost, you absolutely should read my book. Let me just put that out there. I'm not going to put a plug, but in a very real sense, if you do get the opportunity to read my book, I encourage you to really, and all 7 layers are very important, but the first 3 layers will really give you a deeper insight to kind of the different folds that make up relationships. And I'll just share with you guys. So the first layer is you. The second layer is what I call source. And the third layer is alignment. Those 3 things, you want to start talking about the fundamental pillars and building blocks of having successful relationships. It's very important. But with that, I also want to say that, look, at the end of the day, we're talking about relationships. We're talking about leadership and influence and empathy. One thing, and it's a quote that I carry near and dear to me, and it's this: it's your ability to connect will always be defined by your ability to align. And if you don't know how to appropriately align and what goes into that, then we have to take a few steps back and figure out what that is.
Oh my gosh, I love it. I love it. Well, I am Deb Creer. I've been having an absolutely delightful discussion with Dr. Gino Collura. And until next time, everyone have a great day.
Tune in for our next program for even more trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. The Business Power Hour, hosted by Deb Creer, is proud to be part of the C-Suite Network.